Welcome back to the Advocate Podcast, where we challenge the narratives surrounding schools and equip families, educators, and communities to advocate with clarity and confidence. I'm your host, Dr. Kristi N. And today's episode is a little different. Next week, I'll be sitting down with an expert to talk about something that sits at the intersection of education, policy, and justice: third grade reading proficiency. Now, if you work in education, you've probably heard this statistic many times. Students who are not reading proficiently by the end of third grade are significantly more likely to struggle academically later. And statistically, they face higher risks of dropping out of school. But the truth is, this conversation is often presented in a very simplified way. We hear the statistic, we hear the urgency, but we rarely pause to ask a deeper question. Why does this happen in the first place? That's the conversation I want to begin today, before next week's interview. Because literacy is not just an education issue, it's also a justice issue. Let's go.
Dr. Kristi N. is an experienced educator and advocate dedicated to empowering students and families to ensure children receive a high-quality education. She specializes in culturally responsive teaching, restorative practices, and social-emotional learning, helping schools create supportive and inclusive environments. Through the Advocate Podcast, she amplifies voices, challenges inequitable systems, and keeps children at the center of every conversation.
Let's start with why third grade is such an important milestone. Up until about third grade, children are learning to read. Teachers are building foundational skills like recognizing sounds and words, decoding letters and patterns, building vocabulary, developing reading fluency, and understanding meaning from text. But after third grade, the expectation shifts. Students are now reading to learn. That means reading becomes the gateway to everything else. Math word problems. And nowadays, in middle school, all math problems are word problems. Science textbooks, rich in academic vocabulary, social studies passages, even written instructions, not to mention research assignments. If reading is difficult, every subject becomes harder. And when every subject becomes harder, frustration grows. Confidence begins to decline. And sometimes what looks like a behavior problem is actually an academic struggle that hasn't been addressed yet. This is why third grade is such a critical checkpoint. But the real story doesn't begin in third grade. It begins years earlier. One of the biggest misconceptions about literacy is that it begins when children enter kindergarten. But in reality, reading development begins much earlier. Language exposure starts shaping literacy development in infancy. Children build vocabulary through conversations with adults. They develop listening comprehension through storytelling. They build background knowledge through experiences, trips to the park, conversations at the dinner table, questions about the world around them. All of these experiences contribute to a child's readiness to learn how to read. But here's where the justice conversation enters the picture. Not every child has access to the same conditions. Some children grow up surrounded by books. Some children grow up in communities where libraries are easily accessible. Some children attend high-quality early childhood programs. Others may experience housing instability, food insecurity, environmental stress, or limited access to early learning opportunities. Those factors are often called social and environmental determinants of learning, and they matter. Because when we look at reading struggles later in elementary school, we have to consider the conditions that shaped that child's development long before they ever walked into a classroom. As an educator, I've seen something important happen in classrooms. When students struggle academically, especially with reading, the struggle doesn't always show up as quiet frustration. Sometimes it shows up as avoidance. A student may avoid reading aloud. A student may distract classmates. A student may joke or act out to redirect attention away from their difficulty. And if we only respond to the behavior without investigating the root cause, we can miss an opportunity to provide support. That's not about blaming teachers or parents. Education is complex. But it does remind us that academic challenges and behavioral patterns are often connected. When students feel successful, they are more likely to engage. When they feel defeated, disengagement becomes more likely. That's why early literacy intervention matters so much, not just for academic outcomes, but for long-term opportunity. When researchers study long-term outcomes connected to literacy, the findings can be difficult to hear. Students who struggle with reading early are statistically more likely to experience academic disengagement, disciplinary referrals, school dropout, limited employment opportunities later in life, and increased opportunities to interact with the criminal justice system. That doesn't mean literacy determines someone's destiny, but it does show us how early educational access can shape life trajectories. And that's why many experts argue that literacy should be viewed not only as an educational priority, but as a social justice priority. Because when children gain access to strong literacy instruction early in life, they gain access to something powerful. Options. Options in education, options in career pathways, options in how they navigate the world. Literacy expands possibility. That's why I'm looking forward to next week's episode. Next week, I'll be sitting down with Mr. Demetrius Paschel, an advocate and expert whose work focuses on the intersection of early literacy, environment, and long-term life outcomes. In our conversation, we're going to explore questions like, how do social conditions influence early reading development? What does the research actually say about third grade reading and later outcomes? How do policies and school systems impact literacy development? And perhaps most importantly, what can educators, families, and communities do differently? Because again, this conversation isn't about blame. It's about understanding the system more clearly so we can respond more effectively. Before that interview airs next week, I want to leave you with something to think about. When we see a child struggling academically, do we immediately look for the problem in the child, or do we pause long enough to examine the conditions surrounding that child's learning? Because literacy is not just about decoding words on a page. It's about access. It's about opportunity. And in many ways, it's about justice. Next week, we're going to go deeper into this conversation. It's going to be powerful, and you won't want to miss it. Until next time, keep asking the hard questions, keep challenging the narratives, and keep advocating, because children deserve adults who won't stop fighting for them. Thank you. See you next time.